So in this week's Vinland Saga episode, we get introduced fully to Best Grandpa. Now, we've been teased when Snake decided to wake up one morning and was upset that there was no breakfast for him, and he said, well, if you don't work, you don't get fed. We've had a little tease of who this man was, but lo and behold, it was actually the most apparently important man on the farm, and I gotta admit, after all the BS that Einhart and Thorfinn has been through, this boy was a welcome surprise. Not only does he hook them up with a horse, which honestly, I think it's pretty much guaranteed they wouldn't have been able to continue to farm without it, because literally how are they going to rip up thousands of trees, root and all? It was next to impossible. But the fact that as long as they do their hard work and they go that extra mile for him, he hooks them up with a nice hot meal, some life lessons. And while, yes, a character like this can't last forever, even ignoring the age, I mean, the age is already a ticking time bomb, but the fact of the matter is, we know eventually war's gonna come to their doorstep, and what happens after he maybe no longer is around? Does Snake hook them up? I don't know. But in terms of getting me even more invested in the Vinland Saga arc, Vinland Saga is hitting it out of the park this week. Now, before we jump any further, gotta make a mention, we got that full uncut live reaction available on my Patreon, so if you want to see my full thoughts to today's episode, head on over there and consider supporting. Easily Vinland Saga, one of my favorite shows to cover week by week. It's right up there. I think it's the Vinland Saga and To Your Eternity. Those are my magnum opus of the anime season. I just absolutely love what they're doing. But I just find it so interesting because there's been so much pain, so much disappointing distress that have come from these characters, and we literally get to end this episode with Einar calling Thorfinn a friend, and for literally the first time maybe in his life, I feel like Thorfinn's looking at, ever since the whole dad plotline, the first 3 episodes of season 1, before that, yes, he had a normal life, but ever since the father's death and his path of revenge, he's never grown up like a normal person. He doesn't even understand farming because he's never had a chance to really observe this land, because all he's done is pillaged, raided, and killed innocent people, right? At the end of the day, he's had a very brutal life and he's done more harm than good, but now he actually has someone who's looking at him saying, we're friends, and he's legit happy. Literally, the last scene we see of this episode before they pull away and cut to the credits is his hand covered in scars. He's throwing seeds into the ground so that they can raise these crops, hopefully buy their freedom, and you just see the damage done to his body, and it almost feels like for a brief moment we got to see him as a normal person, and not someone burdened by scars and torment, and honestly, yes, it won't last forever. Eventually, war is going to come to their doorstep. We have in this episode Snake admit that they do not have enough to protect this entire farm. They basically they push back the thieves, and the reason that more people don't come to raid, destroy, and all this is because they literally buy their peace from the king. And if we rewind to last week's episode, we see how buying the peace works for someone like Canute. No, that's not what he's all about. So eventually, I think there's going to be a welcoming party that will come to their doorsteps. Snake's not going to be able to push back. I mean, he even says 50 to 60 men is enough to overtake this entire farm, and if we rewind to season 1, we've seen Thorfinn do exactly that with Aslad and everything like that. So at the end of the day, we know where the season wants to go. It's just a matter of how long it takes to eventually get there. But in terms of really establishing something that feels hopeful for once, not completely distressed, I mean, I can't be the only one. When the other people came over, hey, did you steal a horse? And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? Are they literally going to steal the horse? They're going to punish them. Old grandpa's going to have a heart attack over what's happened. But they actually de-escalated it in a way that made sense. To them, it just looked like 2 slaves stole a horse. I mean, the horses all kind of look the same to them. And when you drop a name that they're not familiar with, it does make sense. It's foolish that they didn't know the most important man on the farm's name, but the fact that once they start explaining, they clue into it, right? The fact that things just happened without making it feel like forced drama. I mean, these characters are a living and walking drama, are barely feeding them, they're barely clothed, they hardly have good hygiene, and the fact that they're literally tasked at pulling up tree stumps, root and all, barehanded with maybe a stick to help pry it open. The retainers are not doing their job. They're not supposed to be doing this barehanded. The retainers are supposed to be giving them horses and help, but if you go to the master who bought you, and even if the master punishes them and makes them work for you, they're just going to make your life a living hell. At this point, the more you make them hate you, the more, as you start planting your crops, they're going to sabotage it so you can never buy your freedom. Hell, we even hear from them in this episode that we actually got permission to have a horse from so-and-so. Yeah, but he's a previous slave. He may be free now, but they have no respect for him. there is a lot of BS happening for these characters, and the way that this arc is going about presenting it feels completely realistic. It's dehumanizing, it's just agony, and that's why when you get a moment where they're waiting out in the rain and we get to see this conversation between father and son, and they just feel like they have no connection, you understand the fear of like, hey, you're gonna kneel over, you're gonna pass out, you're gonna end up dying someday, and he's like, I would rather die on my farm than anything else. And then we get to see the connection between Snake and him, and they feel way more connected than the actual father and son in that moment there. And it's interesting because on paper and at face value, they're very hostile towards one another. It's basically the difference of a proud current warrior and a previous warrior who's now kind of like in a farmer's role and just sees everything as a lot of BS. People buying, why do we need all this land? Like, wealth it just corrupts. Basically, you're fearful of losing your wealth, so then you spend it, but then you need to make more. And you can see what ultimately happens with everything that's going on. And I think that's what's so brilliant about that conversation, because you can see there's a general connection there and something that feels genuine, all things considered. But yes, they definitely butt heads. They have a little bit of a temperament issue with one another, but they do feel like they have a genuine connection. And I do worry what will happen when Gramps does eventually kick the bucket, because he's the one providing the horse. What happens when he eventually dies? Is this going to happen long after the fact? Is it going to happen very soon? We don't know. They literally reveal in this episode that he does pass out sometimes on the field, and it's a little worrisome because what's going to happen? Is Snake going to hook them up? I mean, that's a possibility, but all things considered, for a brief moment, they got a hot meal, they got to relax for once, and it felt like things weren't completely helpless. And I think this season has done a very good job at escalating and de-escalating and getting into that middle ground. In many ways, you might be able to call this the calm before the storm episode. Last week really establishing what the king's up to, and he's completely okay going to lengths such as poison because he's going to get the job done. This episode is all about letting them actually feel like they have a chance, but things will pop off eventually, and it's only a matter of time. For now, though, it did feel nice to see the characters not get beaten, not get bruised, and actually feel like they succeeded for once. And the fact that we can end with him calling him a friend is just, it warms your heart, even though you know this type of peace can't last forever. But it is interesting when you compare season 1 to season 2, right? You had the killer Thorfinn, who he was so bloodthirsty, and then you had the almost pacifist Canoe, and now in season 2, the roles have been reversed. And it'll be very interesting to see what their relationship would be like, or their conversation would be like when they eventually meet back up someday, because very different personas right now, and it's very exciting, if not worrisome. What I do appreciate, though, is Thorfinn as a character. Einar doesn't even comprehend the idea that he comes from a land that didn't have farming, but when you think about it, he's never really grown up in a way that feels normal, right? As from such a young age, he was a killer. He never really got to stop and look at the intricate details of, like, a farmer made something that a non-farmer never would have been able to comprehend, because a farmer understands the hard work that goes into plowing the field, so he understood what he needed to make to aid in that, and he's just so fascinated. But he's a young adult now, he's a young man, and the fact that he just now is realizing those things really puts into perspective how isolated his life truly was, and how disappointing his life was, given that it was just, he was a killer at such a young age, he never really got to grow up in a normal environment, and we're really seeing now that Einar is like the big brother, the family he's really needed this entire time. But either way, I leave now another episode of Vinland Saga, excited for more, but I'll pass the torch over to you. What did you think? Theories and speculations, if you got any, let me know down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new around here, ring that bell so you can get notified when I upload on the channel. Of course, as I mentioned, we got that full live reaction over on my Patreon. And while you're there, you can also get yourself a video shoutout like a few we're about to get here. So today we got Mood Killer 27, V Stan, and LC. So I appreciate the support, everyone. Please take care and have a good one.